Hey everyone, tonight we're diving into a subject both scholarly and scandalous, the intimate, complex, and occasionally downright fascinating world of sex in ancient China. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let's start by dismantling the biggest misconception about ancient Chinese intimacy. Contrary to popular belief, ancient China was not a land where everyone spent their evenings meditating in separate rooms while contemplating the virtues of celibacy. While Confucian ideals certainly emphasized propriety and restraint, the reality was far more nuanced, passionate, and surprisingly progressive in some aspects. Ancient Chinese culture had a complex relationship with sexuality that varied dramatically depending on the dynasty, social class, and philosophical school of thought. During the Han Dynasty, for instance, intimate instruction manuals were not hidden away in secret libraries. They were openly discussed among educated circles and considered essential knowledge for maintaining health and harmony. The famous bedroom arts texts, such as the Classic of the Plain Girl and the Secret Instructions of the Jade Chamber, were written by scholars and physicians who viewed sexual knowledge as a branch of medicine and philosophy, not as something shameful or purely recreational. These weren't crude manuals, they were sophisticated treatises that combined Taoist principles with practical advice. Privacy, however, was indeed a luxury. Most families lived in courtyard compounds where multiple generations shared the same space. The wealthy might have had separate chambers, but even then, servants, concubines, and relatives were never far away. Paper-thin walls and the constant presence of household staff meant that discretion was an art form, and timing was everything. For the common people, privacy was even more elusive. Farmers and merchants often lived in single-room dwellings where the entire family slept on the same platform bed, called a kang. Children, grandparents, and sometimes even livestock shared the same roof. If you wanted some alone time with your spouse, you had to be creative, quiet, and patient. The upper classes had more options, but even they had to navigate complex social expectations. A proper Confucian gentleman was expected to be restrained in all things, including passion. Too much enthusiasm was considered undignified, while too little might suggest a lack of virility. It was a delicate balance that required both emotional intelligence and impeccable timing. Still, beneath all this propriety and protocol, human nature persisted. People fell in love, pursued secret affairs, and found ways to express their desires despite the social constraints. The key was doing it all with the proper amount of ceremony, respect, and face-saving discretion that Chinese culture demanded. If you thought navigating modern relationships was complicated, spare a thought for ancient Chinese couples who had to consider not just their own feelings, but the opinions of their ancestors, the harmony of the cosmos, and whether their union would produce sons capable of carrying on the family name. Confucianism, the dominant philosophical system for over 2 millennia, had very specific ideas about the role of intimate relationships in society. According to Confucian teaching, physical intimacy wasn't just about personal pleasure or even love. It was about fulfilling your duty to your family, your ancestors, and the cosmic order itself. The primary purpose of marriage was procreation, specifically the production of male heirs who could continue the family lineage and perform the necessary ancestor worship rituals. This wasn't just a personal preference, it was a moral obligation. A man who failed to produce sons was considered unfilial, which was one of the gravest sins in Confucian ethics. But Confucianism also emphasized moderation in all things. Excessive passion was seen as disruptive to one's character and potentially harmful to one's health and longevity. The ideal Confucian gentleman approached intimacy with the same measured restraint he brought to all aspects of life. Deliberately, purposefully, and with proper attention to hierarchy and propriety. This created some interesting dynamics within marriages. Husbands were expected to visit their wives' chambers at appropriate intervals, not too frequently, lest they appear lustful, but not too rarely, lest they neglect their marital duties. There were even guidelines about timing. Certain days of the lunar calendar were considered more auspicious for conception, while others were deemed inappropriate for intimate relations. The concept of Li, or ritual propriety extended into the bedroom as well. There were proper ways to approach one's spouse, proper sequences for disrobing, and even proper positions that maintained the hierarchical relationship between husband and wife. The husband, as the superior party, was expected to maintain his dignity even in moments of passion. For women, the Confucian ideal was even more restrictive. The 3 obediences required a woman to obey her father before marriage, her husband during marriage, and her son in widowhood. This extended to intimate matters as well. A wife's desires were secondary to her husband's needs and the family's reproductive goals. Yet within these constraints, there was still room for affection, tenderness, and even genuine partnership. Many Confucian texts speak of the importance of harmony between husband and wife, and this harmony was understood to include physical as well as emotional compatibility. The wise husband was advised to be gentle and considerate with his wife, understanding that her happiness contributed to the overall harmony of the household. Some Confucian scholars even argued that mutual pleasure was important for conception, suggesting that children conceived in love and harmony would be healthier and more virtuous than those conceived in duty alone. This wasn't revolutionary thinking, but it did provide some space for couples to pursue genuine intimacy within the framework of moral obligation. While Confucians were busy categorizing the proper moral framework for relationships, the Taoists took a refreshingly different approach. To them, sexual energy wasn't something to be restrained or rationalized. It was a fundamental force of nature that could be harnessed for health, longevity, and spiritual enlightenment. Taoist philosophy views the universe as governed by the interplay of yin and yang, the feminine and masculine principles that exist in all things. Sexual union was seen as the perfect embodiment of this cosmic harmony, a way for individuals to align themselves with the natural order and cultivate their vital energy, or qi. The Taoists developed elaborate theories about sexual practices that were far more sophisticated than anything found in Western traditions of the same period. They believed that sexual energy was one of the 3 treasures of human existence, along with breath and spirit. Properly cultivated, this energy could be used to achieve not just physical pleasure, but also improved health, mental clarity, and even immortality. One of the central concepts in Taoist sexuality was the idea of returning the essence. Men were taught techniques for retaining their vital essence during intimacy, believing that frequent ejaculation weakened the body and shortened life. Instead, they were encouraged to bring their partners to satisfaction while conserving their own energy, which could then be circulated throughout the body to promote health and longevity. This wasn't about male dominance or female subjugation, quite the opposite. Taoist texts emphasized the importance of female pleasure and satisfaction, arguing that a woman's yin energy was essential for balancing and nourishing the man's yang. The Secrets of the Jade Chamber contains detailed instructions for ensuring female satisfaction, with particular attention to timing, technique, and emotional connection. Women, in Taoist practice, were seen as naturally superior in their ability to experience and circulate sexual energy. They were believed to have unlimited capacity for pleasure and could help their partners achieve higher states of consciousness through proper intimate practices. This was a remarkably progressive view for any ancient culture. The Taoists also developed sophisticated breathing techniques, meditation practices, and physical exercises that could be combined with intimate activity. These weren't just about enhancing pleasure, they were spiritual practices designed to harmonize the body's energy systems and promote overall well-being. Different positions were associated with different health benefits and energy flows. The dragon plays in the water position was said to strengthen the kidneys, while the phoenix soars above the clouds was believed to improve circulation and calm the mind. These weren't arbitrary names. Each position was carefully designed to facilitate specific energy exchanges between partners. Timing was also crucial in Taoist practice. They developed elaborate calendars that correlated intimate activity with lunar cycles, seasonal changes, and even the time of day. Spring and autumn were considered the most auspicious seasons for conception, while winter was seen as ideal for conserving energy and practicing retention techniques. The ultimate goal of Taoist sexual practice wasn't just physical satisfaction or even procreation, it was spiritual transformation. Advanced practitioners believed they could use sexual energy to achieve enlightenment, extend their lives, and even achieve a form of physical immortality. Whether or not anyone actually achieved these lofty goals, The practices themselves created a framework for approaching intimacy as a sacred and transformative experience. Romance in ancient China wasn't about sliding into someone's direct messages or matching on a dating app. It was an elaborate dance of symbols, intermediaries, and carefully orchestrated encounters that could take months or even years to unfold. If you were hoping for spontaneous passion, you'd be better off reading poetry about it, which incidentally, many people did. Courtship in imperial China was primarily a family affair. Parents, particularly fathers, held ultimate authority over their children's marriages, and love was considered a pleasant bonus rather than a prerequisite. Marriage was fundamentally an alliance between families designed to strengthen social networks, consolidate wealth, and ensure the continuation of both lineages. The process typically began with matchmakers, professional negotiators, who specialized in evaluating potential matches based on family background, economic status, astrological compatibility, and personal character. These weren't amateur cupids, they were skilled professionals who understood the complex social dynamics that made marriages succeed or fail. A good matchmaker would investigate not just the immediate families involved, but their extended networks, financial situations, and even the moral character of distant relatives. They would consult fortune tellers to ensure astrological compatibility, examine family genealogies to avoid inappropriate matches, and negotiate the complex financial arrangements that accompanied every marriage. For the young people involved, this process could be both exciting and terrifying. They often had little or no say in the choice of partner, and might not even meet their future spouse until the wedding day. However, this doesn't mean they were entirely passive participants. Clever young people found ways to influence the process through intermediaries, subtle suggestions, and strategic displays of their own virtues. The wealthy classes had somewhat more flexibility. Poetry exchanges were a popular form of courtship among the educated elite. A young man might compose verses expressing his admiration for a young woman's beauty or virtue, and she might respond with equally elegant verses that either encouraged or discouraged his suit. These weren't love letters in the modern sense. They were highly stylized literary exercises that demonstrated education, refinement, and cultural sophistication. Secret meetings were not unheard of, but they required elaborate planning and the cooperation of sympathetic servants or relatives. A young woman might accidentally appear in a garden when a particular young man was visiting her family, or a man might arrange to encounter a woman at a temple festival where social conventions were slightly more relaxed. Gift-giving was another important element of courtship, but even this was highly regulated. Appropriate gifts included books, hair ornaments, small pieces of jewelry, or symbolic items like jade pendants. Inappropriate gifts, anything too expensive, too personal, or too obviously romantic, could cause scandal and ruin a young woman's reputation. The concept of face played a crucial role in all courtship activities. No one could appear too eager or too desperate, as this would reflect poorly on their family's status and dignity. At the same time, no one could appear completely indifferent, as this might be interpreted as arrogance or disrespect. Finding the right balance required considerable social skill and cultural knowledge. Even after a marriage was arranged, the courtship process continued through the elaborate series of ceremonies and exchanges that preceded the actual wedding. These could include formal betrothal ceremonies, exchange of gifts between families, consultation with fortune tellers, and multiple rounds of negotiations about dowry, living arrangements, and wedding details. For those who couldn't afford elaborate matchmaking services, courtship was simpler, but no less rule-bound. Young farmers might meet at seasonal festivals or market days, always under the watchful eyes of their families and communities. Even the poorest families insisted on proper procedures for arranging marriages, as this was seen as essential for maintaining social order and family honor. If you think modern weddings are stressful, consider the ancient Chinese bride who had to navigate a multi-day ceremony designed to demonstrate her virtue, secure her family's honor, and hopefully not trip over her elaborate robes while carrying a tea tray to her new in-laws. Traditional Chinese weddings were not single-day affairs. They were complex ritual processes that could span weeks or even months, involving multiple ceremonies, exchanges of gifts, consultations with fortune tellers, and elaborate displays of wealth and status. Every detail was carefully planned to ensure auspicious outcomes and demonstrate the family's commitment to propriety and tradition. The process typically began with the formal proposal and acceptance, followed by the exchange of betrothal gifts. These weren't token presents, they were substantial transfers of wealth that sealed the agreement between families. The groom's family would present gifts such as tea, wine, poultry, and jewelry to the bride's family, while the bride's family would prepare her dowry, which might include furniture, clothing, jewelry, and sometimes even property. Several days before the wedding, the bride would undergo a series of preparatory rituals. She would be formally instructed in her duties as a wife and daughter-in-law by elderly female relatives, often while receiving beauty treatments designed to ensure she looked her best on the wedding day. Her hair would be arranged in an elaborate style that signified her transition from maiden to wife, and she would be dressed in layers of silk robes in auspicious colours. The wedding day itself began before dawn, with ceremonies at both families' homes. The groom would formally request permission from his ancestors to bring a new member into the family, while the bride would bid farewell to her own ancestors and family. These weren't simple prayers, they were elaborate rituals involving incense, offerings, and formal recitations that could take hours to complete. The bride's journey to her new home was itself a major ceremony. She would be carried in a sedan chair, often decorated with red silk, and accompanied by a procession of musicians, servants, and family members. The route was carefully planned to avoid inauspicious locations, and the timing was calculated to ensure arrival at the most auspicious moment. Upon arrival at the groom's home, the couple would participate in the formal wedding ceremony, which centered around paying respects to the groom's ancestors and parents. They would serve tea to the elder family members, receive blessings and gifts, and formally acknowledge their new relationships and responsibilities. But the public ceremonies were just the beginning. The wedding night was equally ritualized, though in a more private setting. The bridal chamber would be prepared with symbolic decorations, red candles for luck, lotus seeds for fertility, dates for early offspring, and mirrors to ward off evil spirits. The bed would be scattered with nuts, fruits, and coins to ensure prosperity and numerous children. Before the couple retired, there were often additional ceremonies. In some regions, the bride would formally serve tea to her new husband, symbolically acknowledging his authority over her. In others, the couple would share wine from cups connected by a red string, symbolizing their union. Sometimes children would be brought to jump on the marriage bed to encourage fertility. The actual wedding night was approached with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Many brides had received instruction from female relatives or marriage manuals about what to expect, but this education was often cryptic and euphemistic. Grooms, particularly those from wealthy families, might have had more experience, but they were also expected to be gentle and considerate with their new wives. Privacy on the wedding night was a luxury that not all couples enjoyed. In some families, relatives might remain nearby to listen for sounds that would confirm the marriage's consummation. In the morning, evidence of the bride's virginity might be displayed to family members as proof of her virtue and the marriage's legitimacy. Despite all the ceremony and pressure, many couples did find genuine affection on their wedding night. The shared experience of navigating complex rituals, the relief of completing their family duties, and the natural human desire for connection often created a foundation for lasting partnerships, even in marriages that began as practical arrangements. While Western cultures struggled with the moral complexities of adultery and extramarital relationships, ancient China developed an entirely different solution: the formal institution of concubinage. This wasn't secret philandering or shameful affairs. It was a legal, socially accepted system that allowed wealthy men to maintain multiple intimate relationships within a carefully structured hierarchy. Concubinage in China wasn't simply about male privilege or sexual gratification. It served several practical functions in a society where infant mortality was high, political alliances were crucial, and family continuation was a moral imperative. A man with only one wife risked seeing his lineage end if she failed to produce male heirs or died in childbirth. Multiple partners increased the chances of having surviving sons to carry on the family name. The system was highly regulated and hierarchical. The primary wife, married with full ceremony and family approval, held the highest status and could not be divorced except under extraordinary circumstances. Below her were secondary wives, who had been formally married but held lower status, often coming from less prominent families or brought in specifically to bear children. Concubines occupied various levels in this hierarchy, from favoured companions who might wield considerable influence, to servants who provided occasional intimate companionship. The number of concubines a man could maintain was primarily limited by his wealth and social status. Emperors might have hundreds, wealthy merchants a handful, while ordinary men could afford none at all. Life as a concubine varied dramatically depending on the household and the woman's position within it. High-ranking concubines in wealthy families might live lives of considerable luxury, with their own servants, apartments, and allowances. They could receive education, patronize arts, and even exercise political influence through their relationships with powerful men. Lower-ranking concubines, however, often lived lives of uncertainty and vulnerability. They had few legal protections, could be dismissed at will, and depended entirely on their patron's favour for their security. Their children, while acknowledged, typically held lower status than those born to primary wives, though sons could still inherit and continue the family line. The primary wife's role in managing concubines was complex and required considerable political skill. She was expected to oversee the household's other women, ensure harmony among them, and even help select new concubines if her husband desired them. A wise primary wife understood that opposing her husband's desire for additional partners could backfire, while skillfully managing concubines could actually strengthen her own position. Jealousy and conflict among wives and concubines were common, despite cultural ideals of harmony and mutual respect. Women competed for their husband's attention, resources for their children, and security for their own futures. These dynamics were particularly intense in imperial households, where the favour of an emperor could elevate a concubine's family to great heights or destroy them entirely. Some concubines achieved remarkable power and influence despite their technically subordinate status. Imperial favourites could become de facto empresses, influencing policy and controlling access to the emperor. The most successful concubines were those who combined beauty with intelligence, using their intimate relationships to build broader political and social networks. Interestingly, the concubinage system also provided some opportunities for women from lower social classes to improve their circumstances. A beautiful or talented woman from a poor family might be selected as a concubine for a wealthy man, gaining access to education, resources, and social connections that would otherwise be impossible. For some, it was a path to security and influence that didn't exist through other means. The system persisted for thousands of years because it served the needs of a patriarchal society while providing enough flexibility to accommodate human nature and practical necessities. It wasn't until the 20th century, with the influence of Western ideas about monogamy and women's rights, that concubinage began to lose social acceptance in Chinese culture. Long before Dr. Ruth or Masters and Johnson, ancient Chinese scholars were writing detailed guides to intimate relationships that would make modern sex educators blush. These weren't hidden away in monastery libraries or whispered about in secret. They were respected medical and philosophical texts that educated elites considered essential reading for a complete education. The most famous of these texts was the Su Nu Jing, or Classic of the Plain Girl, purportedly based on conversations between the Yellow Emperor and a wise woman named Su Nu, who instructed him in the arts of intimate relationships. This wasn't erotica. It was presented as serious instruction in health, longevity, and cosmic harmony. The text combined practical advice with Taoist philosophy, treating sexual knowledge as a branch of medicine and spiritual cultivation. Another influential work was the Jade Chamber Secrets, which provided detailed guidance on techniques, timing, and health considerations. These manuals didn't just focus on physical mechanics, they emphasized the importance of emotional connection, mutual pleasure, and the proper cultivation of sexual energy for health and longevity. What's remarkable about these texts is their frank discussion of female pleasure and satisfaction. At a time when many cultures viewed women's sexual needs as irrelevant or even dangerous, Chinese marriage manuals insisted that female satisfaction was essential for male health and successful conception. They provided detailed anatomical descriptions and specific techniques for ensuring that both partners experience fulfillment. The manuals also contained practical advice that reveals much about the realities of intimate relationships in ancient China. They discussed the importance of cleanliness, the proper use of lubricants, often made from plant oils or animal fats, and even early forms of contraception, using herbal preparations or barrier methods. Timing was given considerable attention in these texts. They correlated intimate activity with lunar cycles, seasonal changes, and even the time of day to maximize both pleasure and the chances of conception. They warned against intimate relations during illness, menstruation, pregnancy, and various inauspicious calendar dates. Some texts provided detailed charts showing which days were most favorable for conception and which should be avoided. The manuals also addressed the emotional and psychological aspects of intimate relationships. They emphasized the importance of courtship and foreplay, providing poetic language for expressing desire and affection. They discussed how to manage jealousy in polygamous households and how to maintain passion in long-term relationships. Medical aspects received significant attention as well. The texts described various health problems that could affect intimate relationships and provided herbal remedies and treatments. They discussed fertility issues, sexual dysfunction, and the relationship between intimate activity and overall health. Many of these observations were remarkably sophisticated for their time. These marriage manuals weren't just for men. Some texts were specifically written for women, often in the form of instruction from older women to younger ones, preparing for marriage. These guides provided practical advice about managing relationships with husbands and co-wives, understanding male psychology, and maintaining health and attractiveness throughout life. The circulation of these texts reveals interesting aspects of Chinese society. They were copied by hand and passed down through families, often as part of a young person's preparation for marriage. Wealthy families might commission illustrated versions, while scholars debated the finer points of technique and philosophy in academic settings. Some of the advice in these ancient manuals seems surprisingly modern. They emphasized communication between partners, the importance of emotional intimacy, and the need for mutual respect and consideration. They warned against excessive passion, while also cautioning against complete indifference, advocating for a balanced approach to intimate relationships that harmonized physical desire with emotional and spiritual needs. The story of women's sexuality in ancient China is one of fascinating contradictions, a culture that simultaneously produced some of the world's most sophisticated guides to female pleasure, and some of its most restrictive codes of feminine virtue. Understanding this paradox requires looking beyond simple narratives of oppression to examine the complex ways women navigated and sometimes subverted patriarchal systems. In theory, Confucian ideology severely limited women's autonomy in all aspects of life, including intimate relationships. The ideal woman was submissive, chaste, and completely devoted to serving first her father, then her husband, then her son. She was expected to find fulfillment through self-sacrifice and to suppress her own desires in favor of family harmony and social order. In practice, however, women found numerous ways to exercise agency within these constraints. Wealthy women, in particular, could wield considerable influence through their relationships with powerful men. The mother of an emperor, the primary wife of a high official, or a favored concubine could shape policy, control resources, and determine the fates of families and entire regions. The concept of inner quarters, the domestic spaces reserved for women, created a parallel power structure within Chinese households. While men controlled the public sphere, women often dominated the private sphere, managing household finances, making important family decisions, and controlling the complex social networks that connected families across generations. Some women achieved remarkable independence through exceptional circumstances. Female merchants, particularly widows who inherited their husbands' businesses, could accumulate considerable wealth and influence. Female religious figures, including Taoist nuns and Buddhist monks, could live independently of male authority while pursuing spiritual and intellectual development. The entertainment industry provided another avenue for women to exercise a form of agency, albeit within strict limitations. Courtesans, singers and performers could achieve fame, wealth, and influence through their talents and relationships with powerful patrons. While their social status remained ambiguous, successful entertainers could live lives of luxury and wield considerable cultural influence. Female literacy, while not universal, was more common in China than in many other ancient civilizations. Educated women wrote poetry, created art, and participated in literary culture. Some women's writings reveal sophisticated understanding of philosophy, politics, and human psychology, suggesting that the intellectual restrictions on women were not always as severe as official ideology suggested. Women also found ways to control their reproductive lives despite official emphasis on procreation. Traditional Chinese medicine included numerous herbal contraceptives and abortifacients, and women passed knowledge about these substances through informal networks. While officially discouraged, family planning was quietly practiced when economic or health considerations made it necessary. The institution of concubinage, while often seen as exploitative, also provided some women with opportunities for advancement that might not otherwise exist. A clever concubine could accumulate wealth, educate her children, and build social networks that benefited her entire family. Some concubines effectively became businesswomen, managing their patrons' affairs and building their own financial independence. Female same-sex relationships, while not officially recognized, were tacitly tolerated in some contexts. The practice of sworn sisterhood allowed women to form intense emotional and sometimes physical bonds that provided companionship and support within the constraints of patriarchal marriage systems. Even within marriage, women could exercise considerable influence through their understanding of male psychology and social dynamics. Marriage manuals written for women provided sophisticated advice about managing husbands, manipulating household politics, and maintaining power within domestic relationships. However, it's important not to romanticize these forms of agency. They existed within systems that fundamentally limited women's options, and often required them to work through rather than against patriarchal structures. Women who pushed too hard against social boundaries faced severe consequences, including social ostracism, family rejection, and economic ruin. The contradiction between women's theoretical powerlessness and their practical influence reflects the gap between ideological systems and lived reality that exists in all societies. While ancient Chinese women faced significant constraints, they also found ways to shape their own lives and influence the world around them, often in ways that official histories fail to record. Ancient China's attitude towards same-sex relationships was complex and varied dramatically across different time periods, social classes, and geographical regions. Unlike some cultures that developed rigid prohibitions against homosexuality, Chinese society generally took a more pragmatic approach, neither enthusiastically celebrating nor systematically persecuting same-sex attractions. The philosophical foundations of Chinese thought actually provided some space for same-sex relationships. Taoism's emphasis on natural harmony and the balance of yin and yang didn't inherently exclude homosexual relationships, as these forces were understood to exist within individuals as well as between them. Some Taoist texts even suggested that same-sex relationships could be spiritually beneficial under certain circumstances. Historical records reveal that homosexual relationships were relatively common and accepted, particularly among the educated elite and in certain social contexts. The imperial court, with its large population of eunuchs and gender-segregated environments, provided numerous opportunities for same-sex relationships that were often tacitly acknowledged, if not officially approved. Perhaps the most famous example of accepted homosexuality in ancient China was the practice known as cut sleeve or shared peach relationships, named after historical accounts of loving relationships between emperors and their male favorites. These terms became euphemisms for homosexual relationships and were used in literature and conversation without the shame or disgust that characterized discussions of homosexuality in many other cultures. Among scholars and artists, same-sex relationships were often romanticized in poetry and literature. The tradition of elegant gatherings, where educated men would meet to discuss philosophy, create art, and enjoy each other's company, sometimes included romantic and sexual elements that were celebrated rather than condemned. These relationships were often seen as expressions of refined aesthetic sensibility rather than moral corruption. The military also provided a context where same-sex relationships were tolerated or even encouraged. Soldiers who formed intense emotional and physical bonds were sometimes seen as more reliable and effective fighters. The loyalty and devotion that characterized the best military relationships could naturally extend into romantic and sexual territory without necessarily causing scandal. For women, same-sex relationships were even more tolerated, partly because they were seen as less threatening to the social order. Female same-sex relationships didn't interfere with marriage or reproduction, and they often developed within the gender-segregated environments of wealthy households, where women spent most of their time together anyway. The practice of sworn sisterhood allowed women to form intense, lifelong bonds that might include romantic and sexual elements, alongside emotional and economic partnership. These relationships were often formalized with ceremonies and vows that paralleled marriage rituals, though they lacked the legal and social recognition accorded to heterosexual unions. However, acceptance of same-sex relationships was not universal or unconditional. They were generally tolerated, as long as they didn't interfere with marriage, reproduction, and family obligations. A man could have romantic relationships with other men, but he was still expected to marry, produce heirs, and fulfill his duties to his family lineage. Same-sex relationships were seen as supplementary to rather than competitive with heterosexual family obligations. Social class played a significant role in determining how same-sex relationships were perceived and tolerated. Wealthy men and women had more freedom to pursue these relationships because they could afford to maintain their social obligations while also indulging their personal preferences. Poor men and women had less latitude because their survival depended more directly on conforming to social expectations and economic necessities. The rise of Neo-Confucianism during the Song dynasty brought increased moral strictness that made same-sex relationships more problematic. Neo-Confucian emphasis on strict moral cultivation and social hierarchy left less room for relationships that didn't serve clear social functions. However, even during these more restrictive periods, same-sex relationships continued to exist, though they might be more discreet or carefully managed. Interestingly, some same-sex relationships in ancient China took forms that would be difficult to categorize using modern Western concepts of sexual identity. Relationships between older and younger men often combined mentorship, emotional intimacy, and sexual attraction in ways that don't fit neatly into contemporary categories of friendship, romance, or sexual partnership. The world of commercial sex in ancient China was far more complex and socially integrated than the underground industry that exists in many modern societies. Rather than being hidden away or universally condemned, prostitution operated as a recognized part of the economic and social landscape, with its own hierarchies, regulations, and cultural significance. At the top of this hierarchy were the courtesans, highly educated women who provided not just sexual services, but also intellectual companionship, artistic entertainment, and social graces that many married women of the time were not trained to provide. These women were skilled in poetry, music, painting, and conversation, and they often moved in elite social circles where their talents were genuinely appreciated. Successful courtesans could accumulate considerable wealth and influence. They maintained their own households, invested in businesses, and sometimes even influenced political decisions through their relationships with powerful men. Some became celebrities of their time, celebrated in literature, and remembered in history for their beauty, wit, and cultural contributions. The training of courtesans was extensive and expensive. Girls who showed promise might be purchased as children and educated in the arts, literature, music, and social graces that would make them valuable companions. This education was often superior to what was available to most women of the time, including many from wealthy families. Below the courtesans were various levels of prostitutes, serving different social classes and economic needs. Tea houses, wine shops, and entertainment districts employed women who provided services ranging from conversation and performance to more intimate companionship. The quality of these establishments and the status of their workers varied enormously, from elegant houses serving wealthy merchants to rough establishments catering to labourers and soldiers. The government's approach to prostitution was typically pragmatic rather than moralistic. Most dynasties regulated rather than prohibited commercial sex, seeing it as a source of tax revenue and a way to maintain social order. Brothels were licensed, taxed, and subject to various regulations regarding location, operation, and health standards. Different regions developed different approaches to regulating the sex trade. Some cities designated specific districts where such businesses could operate, while others allowed them to be more dispersed throughout urban areas. The level of official tolerance varied with political changes, moral campaigns, and the personal attitudes of local officials. The relationship between prostitution and the entertainment industry was complex and often overlapping. Many establishments provided a range of services including food, alcohol, music, gambling, and sexual services, all under one roof. The boundaries between restaurant server, entertainer, and prostitute were often fluid, with individual women moving between roles depending on circumstances and opportunities. Marriage between prostitutes and their clients was not unknown, though it was complicated by social status considerations. A wealthy man might take a favorite courtesan as a concubine, effectively removing her from the commercial sex trade while acknowledging their relationship. Such arrangements could provide security for women who might otherwise face poverty and vulnerability as they aged. The lives of women in the sex trade varied dramatically, depending on their circumstances, talents, and luck. Some achieved independence and prosperity, while others faced exploitation, disease, and poverty. The lack of reliable contraception meant that pregnancy was a constant risk that could end a woman's career or force her into dangerous attempts at abortion. Health considerations were a constant concern in the sex trade. Traditional Chinese medicine provided various treatments for sexually transmitted diseases, though their effectiveness was limited. Some establishments employed doctors or maintained relationships with medical practitioners who could provide treatment for workers and clients. The cultural significance of prostitution extended beyond its economic function. Literature, art, and popular culture often romanticized the lives of courtesans and celebrated their beauty, talents, and tragic stories. This romanticization sometimes obscured the harsh realities of commercial sex work, but it also created a cultural space where these women could be seen as more than just sexual objects. The entertainment districts themselves became important cultural centers, where new fashions, artistic styles, and social trends often originated. The courtesans and entertainers who worked in these areas were frequently at the forefront of cultural innovation, introducing new styles of dress, music, and artistic expression that would later be adopted by respectable society. Despite the cultural emphasis on producing heirs, practical considerations often made family planning necessary in ancient China. Families had to balance the desire for children with economic realities, health concerns, and the social dynamics of managing multiple wives and concubines. The result was a sophisticated, if not always reliable, system of contraceptive methods and family planning strategies. Traditional Chinese medicine developed numerous herbal contraceptives that were passed down through generations of women. These remedies ranged from simple teas made from common plants to complex formulations that required considerable knowledge to prepare safely. Some of the most commonly used herbs included tang kui, safflower, and various forms of ginseng, often combined in specific proportions and taken at particular times in a woman's cycle. The effectiveness of these herbal contraceptives varied considerably. Some contained compounds that modern science recognizes as having contraceptive properties, while others were based more on symbolic associations than actual biological effects. Women often combined multiple methods, using herbal preparations alongside barrier methods and timing strategies to maximize their chances of preventing unwanted pregnancies. Barrier methods were also known and used, though they were primitive by modern standards. Women might use cotton, silk, or other fabrics soaked in various substances to create makeshift diaphragms or cervical caps. These materials were often treated with acidic substances like vinegar or lemon juice, which do have some spermicidal properties, though they were also potentially harmful to the user. Timing-based methods were perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of Chinese family planning. Traditional medicine recognized that women were more likely to conceive at certain times in their menstrual cycles, and detailed calendars were developed to help women track these fertile periods. While these methods weren't always accurate by modern standards, they demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of reproductive biology. The lunar calendar played an important role in family planning decisions. Different phases of the moon were believed to affect fertility, and couples might time intimate relations to coincide with periods when conception was either more or less likely, depending on their goals. These beliefs were integrated with observations about women's natural cycles to create comprehensive family planning systems. Post-coital methods were also employed, ranging from douching with various herbal preparations to physical activities believed to prevent implantation. Some of these methods, like immediate bathing or jumping, were based more on folk wisdom than medical knowledge, but they reflect the active efforts that couples made to control their reproductive outcomes. Abortion, while morally problematic in Confucian ethics, was nonetheless practiced when family planning methods failed. Traditional medicine included various abortifacient herbs and procedures, though these were dangerous and not always effective. The decision to terminate a pregnancy was usually made based on economic considerations, health concerns, or family dynamics rather than simple preference. Wet nurses and child-rearing practices also factored into family planning strategies. Wealthy families could afford to hire wet nurses, allowing mothers to resume intimate relations sooner after childbirth. This could lead to more frequent pregnancies, but it also gave families more control over the timing of subsequent children. The spacing of children was considered important for both practical and astrological reasons. Children born too close together might strain family resources and create succession problems, while children born during inauspicious periods might face various disadvantages throughout their lives. Families often planned pregnancies to ensure that children would be born during favourable astrological conditions. Economic considerations played a major role in family planning decisions. While having many sons was considered ideal, families also had to consider their ability to provide for, educate, and establish careers for multiple children. Too many children could impoverish a family, while too few might leave it vulnerable to economic and social instability. The management of multiple wives and concubines required careful family planning to avoid conflicts and ensure fair treatment. A man might need to balance his intimate relations among his various partners to maintain household harmony, while also ensuring that each woman had reasonable opportunities for pregnancy and childbearing. In a society where marriage was primarily a social and economic institution rather than a romantic partnership, adultery took on different meanings and consequences than it might in cultures that emphasized love-based unions. The rules, punishments, and social responses to infidelity varied dramatically depending on gender, social class, and the specific circumstances of the transgression. For women, adultery was considered one of the most serious crimes possible, threatening not only family honor, but also the legitimacy of children and the stability of inheritance lines. A married woman who engaged in extramarital relationships could face severe punishment, including divorce, physical punishment, social ostracism, and even death in extreme cases. The emphasis on female chastity was so strong that even the suspicion of impropriety could ruin a woman's reputation and destroy her family's social standing. Men, on the other hand, faced more lenient treatment for extramarital relationships, particularly if they involved unmarried women or professional entertainers. The institution of concubinage meant that wealthy men could legally maintain multiple intimate relationships, while poorer men might visit brothels or engage in casual relationships without facing serious social consequences. However, this tolerance had limits. Relationships that threatened family stability or violated social hierarchies could still result in punishment. The double standard regarding adultery reflected deeper beliefs about gender, sexuality, and social order. Women were seen as the guardians of family virtue and the vessels for legitimate heirs, making their sexual fidelity crucial for social stability. Men were viewed as naturally inclined toward multiple relationships, and their extramarital activities were seen as less threatening to the social order, as long as they didn't neglect their primary family obligations. Detection of adultery often relied on community surveillance and gossip networks that could make privacy nearly impossible. Servants, neighbours, and relatives all played roles in monitoring and reporting suspicious behaviour. In some cases, accusation of adultery might be used as a weapon in family conflicts or property disputes, making false accusations a significant concern for innocent parties. When adultery was discovered, the response often involved complex negotiations between families rather than simple punishment of individuals. The families involved might need to consider the economic consequences of divorce, the welfare of children, and the broader social implications of public scandal. Sometimes financial compensation or other arrangements could resolve adultery cases without resorting to more dramatic punishments. Legal procedures for handling adultery varied between different dynasties and regions, but most legal codes included specific provisions for dealing with extramarital relationships. Evidence requirements, witness testimony, and punishment guidelines were all carefully specified, though the actual implementation often depended on local officials and social circumstances. The punishment for female adultery could be severe, but it was not always consistently applied. Wealthy families might prefer to handle scandals quietly rather than risk public embarrassment, while poor families might not have the resources to pursue legal action. Local officials might choose to overlook adultery cases if pursuing them would create more problems than they solved. Male adultery was more likely to be punished if it involved violations of social hierarchy or caused significant family disruption. A man who seduced his superior's wife or who neglected his family responsibilities while pursuing extramarital relationships might face legal consequences, even though similar behavior in other contexts would be tolerated. Some forms of adultery were considered more serious than others. Relationships that crossed significant class boundaries, involved married partners from both sides, or resulted in pregnancy, were treated more severely than casual encounters that didn't threaten family stability. The specific details of each case mattered enormously in determining both legal and social responses. Interestingly, some adultery cases resulted in complex rearrangements of family relationships rather than simple punishment. A man might marry his lover as a secondary wife or concubine, effectively legitimizing the relationship while maintaining his primary marriage. Such arrangements required careful negotiation and often substantial financial compensation to the offended parties. Perhaps no group in ancient Chinese society occupied a more complex position regarding sexuality than the eunuchs who served in the imperial palace. Castrated to ensure they posed no sexual threat to the emperor's women, these men paradoxically became central figures in the intimate life of the imperial court, wielding enormous influence over romantic relationships, succession politics, and the sexual culture of the most powerful institution in China. Eunuch castration typically occurred in childhood, either as punishment for crime, as a voluntary sacrifice by poor families seeking advancement, or through forcible recruitment by the imperial government. The procedure was dangerous, and many boys died from infection or blood loss, but those who survived could look forward to careers that might otherwise be impossible given their social origins. Within the imperial palace, eunuchs served in various capacities that brought them into intimate contact with the emperor's personal life. They managed the imperial harem, facilitated romantic encounters, and often knew more about the emperor's sexual preferences and activities than anyone else in the empire. This knowledge gave them tremendous potential for influence and made them valuable allies or dangerous enemies. The relationship between eunuchs and the imperial women was particularly complex. Since eunuchs posed no sexual threat, they could move freely within the women's quarters, and often developed close friendships with empresses, concubines, and palace ladies. These relationships could be emotionally intimate, even if they weren't physically sexual, and they sometimes influenced major political decisions. Some eunuchs achieved remarkable power through their positions in the imperial household. They might control access to the emperor, influence his choice of companions for the evening, and even shape his opinions about matters of state through their intimate conversations. The most successful eunuchs understood that managing the emperor's personal satisfaction was often the key to political influence. The presence of large numbers of eunuchs in the palace created its own sexual dynamics and subcultures. While they couldn't engage in conventional sexual relationships, eunuchs often formed intense emotional partnerships with each other, and sometimes with palace women. These relationships might involve romantic affection, emotional support, and even forms of physical intimacy that didn't require conventional sexual function. Historical records suggest that some eunuchs maintained sexual relationships despite their castration. Depending on the age and method of castration, some retained the ability to achieve arousal and even orgasm, though they couldn't father children. This led to complex relationships with both men and women that challenged conventional understanding of sexuality and gender roles. The eunuch system also created opportunities for sexual deception and intrigue. Some men who claimed to be eunuchs had undergone only partial castration or fake procedures, allowing them to maintain sexual function while gaining access to the palace. If discovered, such deception was punishable by death, but the potential rewards made the risk worthwhile for some ambitious men. Eunuchs often served as intermediaries in the emperor's romantic relationships, arranging meetings, carrying messages, and even providing advice about intimate matters. Their detailed knowledge of palace women and their understanding of the emperor's preferences made them invaluable in managing the complex logistics of imperial romance. The influence of eunuchs on imperial sexuality sometimes extended to broader cultural trends. Fashion, artistic preferences, and social customs that originated in the palace often spread to the broader population, meaning that unique tastes and opinions could shape the sexual culture of the entire empire. Their unique position between male and female worlds sometimes made them innovators in matters of beauty, refinement, and romantic expression. Some eunuchs achieved such power that they effectively controlled imperial succession by influencing which of the emperor's children received favor and resources. Since romantic relationships often determined political alliances and inheritance rights, eunuchs could shape the future of the dynasty through their management of imperial sexual politics. The relationship between emperors and their most trusted eunuchs sometimes took on romantic characteristics that contemporaries recognized and accepted. These relationships might involve emotional intimacy, exclusive companionship, and forms of physical affection that contemporary sources describe in terms usually reserved for romantic partnership. However, the eunuch system also created tensions and problems within the imperial court. Eunuchs who gained too much power might threaten traditional aristocratic families, while their inability to have families of their own sometimes led to corruption and short-term thinking. The sexual dynamics they created within the palace could become a source of instability rather than harmony. Ancient Chinese medicine approached sexuality not as a moral issue or purely physical function, but as a crucial component of overall health that required careful understanding and management. Their sophisticated theories about sexual health, developed over thousands of years, combined empirical observation with philosophical principles to create comprehensive systems for maintaining sexual wellness throughout life. The foundation of Chinese sexual medicine lay in the theory of qi, the vital energy that flows through the body and governs all physiological functions. Sexual activity was understood to involve the circulation and exchange of qi between partners, making it both a source of health and a potential cause of illness, if not properly managed. This perspective led to detailed guidelines about frequency, timing, and technique designed to optimize health benefits while minimizing potential harm. Chinese physicians developed elaborate theories about the relationship between sexual activity and longevity. They believed that sexual energy, properly conserved and circulated, could extend life and promote health, while excessive or improper sexual activity could weaken the body and accelerate aging. These theories led to specific recommendations for different ages, constitutions, and health conditions. The concept of sexual moderation was central to Chinese medical thinking, but their definition of moderation was more nuanced than simple restriction. They recommended different frequencies of sexual activity based on age, season, health status, and individual constitution. Young, healthy individuals might engage in intimate relations several times per week, while older people might be advised to limit such activity to preserve their vital essence. Seasonal variations in sexual activity were considered important for maintaining health and harmony with natural cycles. Spring and early summer were seen as optimal times for sexual activity and conception, while winter was considered a time for conservation of energy. These recommendations were based on observations about natural fertility cycles and the effects of seasonal changes on human physiology. Chinese medicine also recognized that sexual dysfunction could be a symptom of broader health problems rather than an isolated issue. Impotence, premature ejaculation, and loss of libido were understood as manifestations of underlying imbalances in qi, blood circulation, or organ function. Treatment focused on addressing these root causes rather than just managing symptoms. Herbal medicine played a major role in treating sexual health problems. Numerous plants and animal products were used to enhance libido, improve sexual function, and address specific problems like erectile dysfunction or infertility. Some of these remedies, like ginseng and deer antler, are still used in traditional medicine today, while others have been discredited by modern scientific understanding. The relationship between diet and sexual health was also well recognized in Chinese medicine. Certain foods were believed to enhance sexual function and fertility, while others were thought to diminish sexual energy. These dietary recommendations were often integrated with herbal treatments and lifestyle modifications to create comprehensive treatment programs. Chinese physicians understood the importance of psychological factors in sexual health long before Western medicine recognized the mind-body connection in sexual function. They recognized that stress, anxiety, and emotional disturbance could cause sexual problems, and they developed meditation, breathing exercises, and counseling techniques to address these issues. Female sexual health received considerable attention in Chinese medical texts, which recognized that women's sexual satisfaction was important for both health and successful conception. These texts provided detailed anatomical descriptions and specific techniques for enhancing female pleasure, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of female sexuality that was unusual for ancient medical systems. The relationship between pregnancy and sexual activity was carefully studied and documented. Chinese physicians recognized that sexual activity could continue during early pregnancy, but should be modified or restricted as pregnancy progressed. They also understood the importance of postpartum recovery and provided specific guidelines for resuming sexual activity after childbirth. Fertility treatments in Chinese medicine often involved both partners and addressed the sexual relationship as well as individual health issues. Physicians recognized that successful conception required not just healthy reproductive systems, but also proper sexual technique, timing, and emotional harmony between partners. The Chinese medical understanding of sexually transmitted diseases was limited, but not entirely absent. They recognized that certain conditions could be transmitted through sexual contact, and developed treatments that, while not always effective, demonstrated their understanding of contagion and the importance of treating both partners in sexual relationships. The physical spaces where intimate relationships unfolded in ancient China were shaped by complex considerations of hierarchy, family structure, climate, and available resources. Understanding the architectural context of Chinese domestic life reveals much about how privacy was conceptualized, achieved, and sometimes deliberately avoided in a culture that valued both family harmony and proper social order. Traditional Chinese homes were organized around the principle of the courtyard, with multiple buildings arranged around open spaces that facilitated both family interaction and supervision. This design reflected Confucian values about family unity and mutual responsibility, but it also meant that true privacy was rare and had to be carefully managed through timing, location, and social protocols. The wealthy families who could afford large compound houses had the most options for achieving privacy. Their homes might include separate courtyards for different branches of the family, with the main wife and her children occupying the most prestigious central courtyard, while secondary wives and concubines lived in smaller adjacent areas. Each courtyard might have its own private chambers, though these were still subject to the movement of servants and family members. Within individual chambers, privacy was created through the use of screens, curtains, and furniture arrangements that could divide larger spaces into smaller, more intimate areas. The famous Chinese folding screens served both decorative and practical functions, allowing couples to create temporary private spaces within rooms that might otherwise be shared with children, servants, or guests. The bed itself was often an elaborate piece of furniture that functioned as a room within a room. Traditional Chinese beds were large, enclosed structures with curtains or panels that could be drawn for privacy. These bed chambers were decorated with symbolic imagery, designed to promote fertility, harmony, and good fortune, creating sacred spaces for intimate activities. Seasonal considerations also affected privacy and intimate relationships. During hot summer months, families might sleep in more open areas or even courtyards to catch cooling breezes, making privacy more difficult to achieve. Winter months, when families gathered in heated rooms, provided more opportunities for intimate privacy, but also meant that sound could carry more easily through thin walls. The concept of appropriate times for intimate activity was partly shaped by the realities of domestic architecture and family life. Early morning hours, when children and servants were less likely to be moving about, became traditional times for intimate relations. Afternoon rest periods, when household activity slowed down, provided another opportunity for privacy. Servants played complex roles in managing domestic privacy. Trusted personal servants might be assigned to ensure that couples were not disturbed during intimate times, while the presence of servants in adjoining rooms or hallways meant that discretion was always necessary. The most elite families might have servants whose specific duties included managing the logistics of their employers' intimate relationships. Sound control was a constant concern in Chinese domestic architecture. Walls were often thin, and sound could carry easily between rooms and courtyards. Couples developed various strategies for maintaining privacy, including the use of soft furnishings to muffle sound. careful timing to avoid busy household periods, and even musical accompaniment to mask the sounds of intimate activity. The gardens and outdoor spaces of wealthy compounds provided additional opportunities for privacy and romantic encounters. Carefully designed landscapes with winding paths, secluded pavilions, and hidden alcoves allowed couples to escape the constant supervision of indoor family life. These spaces were often designed with romantic encounters in mind, featuring symbolic plants and artistic elements that enhanced intimate experiences. Regional variations in climate and building materials affected domestic privacy in different ways. Northern Chinese homes, built to withstand harsh winters, were often more enclosed and provided better acoustic privacy, but less ventilation. Southern homes, designed for hot, humid climates, were more open and airy, but offered less acoustic and visual privacy. The layout of domestic spaces also reflected and reinforced social hierarchies within families. The most senior family members occupied the most private and prestigious rooms, while younger family members and servants lived in spaces that offered less privacy and comfort. This architectural hierarchy extended to intimate relationships, with primary wives enjoying better accommodations than secondary wives or concubines. Storage and preparation of items related to intimate activities required careful consideration in domestic planning. Special cabinets or containers might be used to store oils, medicines, and other supplies needed for intimate relations. These items had to be kept accessible but discreet, requiring furniture designed with hidden compartments or special storage areas. The integration of religious and spiritual elements into domestic architecture also affected intimate relationships. Many homes included shrines or altars dedicated to ancestors or protective deities, and these sacred spaces influenced when and where intimate activities could appropriately take place. Couples had to navigate not just physical privacy, but also spiritual appropriateness in their intimate relationships. The rhythm of ancient Chinese life was punctuated by numerous festivals and celebrations that provided unique opportunities for romantic encounters, courtship displays, and the temporary relaxation of normal social restrictions. These occasions were carefully woven into the fabric of Chinese culture, creating sanctioned times and spaces where young people might meet, couples could celebrate their relationships, and communities could indulge in more relaxed attitudes toward romantic expression. The Spring Festival, marking the Lunar New Year, was perhaps the most important celebration for romantic relationships. This was a time when families came together, marriages were often celebrated, and young people might have opportunities to meet potential partners during the round of visits and celebrations that characterized the holiday season. The festival's emphasis on new beginnings and fertility made it an auspicious time for romantic activities and wedding preparations. The Qixi Festival, often called the Chinese Valentine's Day, commemorated the legendary love story of the Weaver Girl and the cowherd. This celebration provided a culturally sanctioned occasion for romantic expression, with young women praying for skill in needlework and good marriages, while couples exchanged gifts and tokens of affection. The festival's romantic themes made it one of the few times when public displays of romantic sentiment were not only tolerated, but encouraged. Mid-autumn festival celebrations, centered around moon viewing and family reunions, created opportunities for romantic encounters in the relative privacy of garden parties and outdoor gatherings. The full moon was considered a symbol of reunion and completeness, making this an auspicious time for engagements, weddings, and the conception of children. Couples might arrange to view the moon together, using the cultural significance of the celebration to justify private time together. Temple festivals and religious celebrations provided another context for romantic encounters, particularly for young people who might otherwise have few opportunities to meet outside their immediate families. These events brought together people from different households and social circles, creating opportunities for carefully supervised interactions that might lead to marriage negotiations. Seasonal agricultural festivals marked important transition points in the yearly cycle and often included elements that celebrated fertility and renewal. Spring planting festivals might include rituals designed to ensure good harvests and healthy families, while autumn harvest celebrations provided opportunities for communities to come together in ways that facilitated matchmaking and courtship. Local customs and regional variations added richness and diversity to the festival calendar, with different areas developing their own traditions around courtship and romance. Some regions had customs that allowed young people more freedom during certain festivals, while others maintained strict supervision even during celebrations. These variations reflected local values and practical considerations about family honor and social control. Wedding celebrations themselves were elaborate festivals that could last for days or even weeks, involving multiple ceremonies, feasts, and celebrations that brought together extended families and social networks. These events provided opportunities for other young people to meet and for existing couples to celebrate their own relationships within the context of community approval and support. The timing of festivals also influenced family planning and intimate relationships. Many couples planned their intimate activities around auspicious festival dates, believing that children conceived during certain celebrations would be blessed with good fortune. This created seasonal patterns in sexual activity that were reinforced by both cultural beliefs and practical considerations. Gift-giving customs associated with various festivals provided opportunities for romantic expression within culturally appropriate frameworks. Young men might present small tokens to women they admired during festivals, when such exchanges were expected and acceptable. These gifts had to be carefully chosen to convey appropriate levels of interest without overstepping social boundaries. Music, dancing, and dramatic performances that accompanied many festivals created atmosphere that could be more conducive to romantic feelings and expression. The temporary suspension of normal social rules during celebrations allowed for interactions and displays of emotion that might be inappropriate during ordinary times. Some festivals included specific rituals or customs related to fertility and reproduction. These might involve symbolic activities designed to promote conception, ensure safe childbirth, or bless new marriages. Participation in these rituals provided couples with culturally sanctioned ways to focus on their intimate relationships and reproductive goals. The economic aspects of festivals also affected romantic relationships, as families might time major purchases, gift exchanges, and marriage negotiations to coincide with celebrations when extended family members were present and business relationships were being renewed. The festival calendar thus became part of the broader economic and social planning that surrounded marriage and family formation. Food traditions associated with festivals often included symbolic elements related to fertility, romance, and family harmony. Special dishes might be prepared and shared by couples, or certain foods might be avoided or consumed based on their believed effects on intimate relationships and reproductive health. The rich literary tradition of ancient China provided sophisticated models for romantic expression that influenced how people thought about love, courtship, and intimate relationships across all social classes. From the earliest classical poems to elaborate novels of the later imperial period, Chinese literature created a vocabulary of romantic sentiment that shaped cultural understanding of love and desire for thousands of years. The Book of Songs, one of China's oldest poetry collections, contains numerous verses that explore themes of love, longing, and sexual desire with remarkable frankness and emotional depth. These ancient poems established literary conventions for expressing romantic feelings that would influence Chinese poetry for millennia. They range from tender expressions of marital affection to passionate declarations of forbidden love, providing models for emotional expression that were both culturally acceptable and deeply moving. Classical Chinese poetry developed sophisticated techniques for expressing romantic and sexual feelings through metaphor, symbolism, and allusion. Poets learned to convey intense emotions while maintaining the restraint and elegance that Chinese literary culture demanded. Images of flowers, seasons, natural landscapes, and mythological figures became coded ways of discussing intimate relationships and sexual desire. The tradition of exchanging poems between lovers became an important part of courtship among educated classes. These poetic exchanges allowed couples to demonstrate their cultural sophistication while expressing feelings that might be inappropriate in direct conversation. The quality of someone's poetry could significantly influence their attractiveness as a potential partner, making literary skill an important component of romantic appeal. Female poets made significant contributions to Chinese literature's treatment of romantic themes, often bringing perspectives on love and sexuality that male writers couldn't provide. Poets like Li Qingzhao wrote with remarkable honesty about marital love, sexual desire, and the pain of separation, creating works that resonated across gender lines and social classes. The development of longer narrative forms, including novels and dramatic works, allowed for more complex exploration of romantic relationships and sexual dynamics. Works like The Romance of the Western Chamber and The Golden Lotus dealt explicitly with sexual themes, while also examining the social and psychological aspects of intimate relationships. Erotic literature occupied a recognized place in Chinese literary culture, with sophisticated works that combined explicit sexual content with philosophical reflection and artistic merit. These texts were not considered pornographic in the modern sense, but rather as serious explorations of human nature and cosmic principles through the lens of sexual experience. The influence of literature on real-life romantic relationships was significant and acknowledged. Young people learnt about love and sexuality partly through reading, and literary models influenced their expectations and behaviours in their own relationships. The ideals of romantic love expressed in literature sometimes conflicted with the practical realities of arranged marriages and family obligations. Calligraphy added another dimension to romantic expression through literature. The physical act of writing poems or letters by hand was itself a form of artistic expression that could convey emotion and personality. Beautiful handwriting was considered an attractive quality, and lovers might spend considerable time perfecting their calligraphy to impress their romantic interests. The memorization and recitation of poetry was an important social skill that facilitated romantic communication. Educated people were expected to know large numbers of poems by heart and to be able to quote appropriate verses for different occasions. This shared literary knowledge created a common language for discussing romantic feelings and experiences. Regional variations in literary traditions meant that different areas of China developed their own distinctive approaches to romantic expression. Southern poetry might emphasize different themes and imagery than northern works, while folk traditions varied significantly between different ethnic groups and geographical regions. The intersection of literature with music and performance arts created additional venues for romantic expression. Poems might be set to music and performed at social gatherings, while dramatic works provided opportunities for both performers and audiences to explore romantic themes in public settings. Censorship and social pressure influenced how explicitly romantic and sexual themes could be treated in literature, but they didn't eliminate such content entirely. Writers developed sophisticated techniques for discussing sexual topics indirectly, while still conveying their meaning to educated readers who understood the literary conventions. The preservation and transmission of romantic literature helped maintain cultural continuity across different dynasties and social changes. Love poems and romantic stories were copied, memorized, and passed down through generations, ensuring that literary models of romantic expression remained available to influence new generations of lovers and writers. The arrival and gradual adoption of Buddhism in China created complex interactions with existing Confucian and Taoist approaches to sexuality, producing new ethical frameworks that influenced how people thought about intimate relationships, desire, and spiritual development. Buddhist concepts of attachment, suffering, and enlightenment provided alternative perspectives on sexual ethics that both challenged and complemented indigenous Chinese values. Buddhist teachings about the nature of desire as a source of suffering created tensions with Chinese cultural emphasis on family continuity and reproductive obligations. While Buddhism advocated for the elimination of sexual desire as part of the path to enlightenment, Chinese society required sexual activity for family continuation and social stability. This tension led to various compromises and adaptations that allowed people to maintain Buddhist faith while fulfilling family obligations. The Buddhist concept of karma influenced how people understood the consequences of sexual behavior. Actions taken in intimate relationships were seen as creating karmic effects that could influence future lives and spiritual development. This perspective encouraged more thoughtful consideration of sexual ethics and the treatment of sexual partners, as people understood that their intimate behaviors had cosmic consequences. Monastic traditions within Chinese Buddhism created alternative models for living that didn't require sexual relationships or family formation. For some people, particularly women, who might otherwise face limited options in a patriarchal society, Buddhist monasteries provided opportunities for spiritual development and social respect that didn't depend on marriage or childbearing. Buddhist teachings about compassion and the interconnectedness of all beings influenced how people approached intimate relationships. The emphasis on reducing suffering and promoting well-being for all sentient beings encouraged more consideration for partners' feelings and needs, potentially leading to more egalitarian and caring sexual relationships. The Buddhist concept of the middle way provided a framework for approaching sexuality that avoided both excessive indulgence and complete rejection. This philosophy allowed people to engage in intimate relationships while maintaining awareness of their spiritual goals and the potential for attachment to create suffering. Buddhist meditation practices and mindfulness techniques influenced how people experienced and understood sexual pleasure and intimate connection. These practices encouraged greater awareness of physical sensations, emotional states, and mental processes during intimate activities, potentially leading to more conscious and fulfilling sexual experiences. The integration of Buddhist and Taoist practices in some schools created unique approaches to sexuality that combined spiritual development with intimate relationships. These syncretic traditions developed techniques for using sexual energy in meditation and spiritual cultivation, creating paths to enlightenment that didn't require celibacy. Buddhist concepts of rebirth and the continuity of consciousness across lifetimes influenced how people understood the purpose and meaning of sexual relationships. The idea that intimate partners might have connections across multiple lifetimes encouraged deeper commitment and more serious consideration of relationship choices. Female Buddhist practitioners developed their own approaches to integrating spiritual practice with the realities of family life and intimate relationships. These women created models for combining Buddhist ethics with the practical necessities of marriage, child-rearing, and household management. Buddhist festivals and observances created temporary periods when sexual activity might be restricted or approached differently. During intensive meditation retreats or important religious observances, couples might abstain from intimate relations as part of their spiritual practice, creating rhythms that integrated religious observance with sexual relationships. The Buddhist emphasis on intention and mindfulness in all actions influenced how people approached sexual decision-making. This perspective encouraged more conscious choices about intimate relationships and greater awareness of the motivations and consequences of sexual behavior. Buddhist teachings about the impermanence of all phenomena, including physical pleasure and romantic attachment, provided frameworks for understanding the changing nature of intimate relationships over time. This perspective could help people navigate the inevitable changes that occur in long-term relationships without becoming overly attached to particular experiences or expectations. The development of lay Buddhist communities created social networks that supported alternative approaches to sexuality and family life. These communities provided examples of how Buddhist ethics could be integrated with family obligations and intimate relationships, offering practical models for spiritual development within the context of householder life. Traditional Chinese medicine developed sophisticated approaches to sexual health that went far beyond simple remedies for dysfunction, creating comprehensive systems for maintaining and enhancing sexual wellness throughout life. These medical traditions recognized sexuality as a crucial component of overall health that required careful attention and expert management. Diagnostic methods in Chinese medicine included detailed questioning about sexual function, satisfaction, and practices as part of comprehensive health assessments. Physicians understood that sexual problems often reflected broader health issues and that sexual wellness was an indicator of general vitality and balance in the body's energy systems. Herbal medicine provided the foundation for most sexual health treatments, with hundreds of plants and animal products used to address various aspects of sexual function. Ginseng, deer antler, cordyceps, and numerous other substances were combined in complex formulations designed to enhance libido, improve sexual performance, and address specific dysfunctions. Acupuncture and moxibustion were used to treat sexual health problems by regulating qi flow and balancing energy in organs related to reproductive function. Specific point combinations were developed for treating impotence, premature ejaculation, low libido, and infertility, with treatments often continuing for weeks or months to achieve lasting results. Dietary therapy played an important role in maintaining sexual health, with specific foods recommended for enhancing sexual function and others avoided as potentially harmful to sexual vitality. These dietary recommendations were often integrated with herbal treatments and lifestyle modifications to create comprehensive treatment programs. Massage and physical manipulation techniques were used both for treating sexual dysfunction and for enhancing sexual pleasure and intimacy between partners. These techniques included specific methods for stimulating energy points, improving circulation, and releasing tension that might interfere with sexual function. Exercise and movement practices, including various forms of qigong and martial arts, were prescribed for maintaining sexual health and vitality. These practices were designed to strengthen the body's core energy, improve circulation, and maintain the physical fitness necessary for healthy sexual function throughout life. Breathing techniques and meditation practices were used to address psychological factors that might affect sexual function. These methods helped patients manage anxiety, improve focus, and develop greater awareness of their bodies and sexual responses. The treatment of female sexual health received significant attention in Chinese medicine, with specific approaches developed for addressing women's unique sexual and reproductive needs. These treatments recognized that female sexual health was complex and required different approaches than male sexual health. Fertility treatments often involved both partners and addressed sexual relationship dynamics, as well as individual health issues. Physicians understood that successful conception required not just healthy reproductive systems, but also satisfying sexual relationships and proper timing of intimate activities. Age-related changes in sexual function were understood and addressed through various medical interventions designed to maintain sexual vitality throughout life. Different treatment approaches were recommended for different life stages, recognizing that sexual health needs change over time. The relationship between emotional and physical aspects of sexual health was well recognized in Chinese medicine, leading to integrated treatment approaches that addressed both psychological and physiological factors affecting sexual function. Preventive approaches to sexual health emphasized lifestyle factors that could maintain sexual vitality and prevent problems before they developed. These included recommendations about frequency of sexual activity, seasonal variations, and practices for conserving and cultivating sexual energy. The training of physicians in sexual health was comprehensive and included both theoretical knowledge and practical experience in treating sexual problems. Medical texts provided detailed case studies and treatment protocols that allowed physicians to develop expertise in this specialized area of practice. Behind the imposing walls of the Forbidden City and other imperial palaces lay one of the most complex and fascinating aspects of Chinese sexuality, the imperial harem system. This wasn't simply a collection of the emperor's women, but rather an elaborate institution that combined romance, politics, reproduction, and power in ways that influenced the fate of dynasties and shaped the cultural understanding of sexuality for an entire civilization. The imperial harem was, first and foremost, a political institution. Every woman who entered the palace brought with her family connections, regional loyalties, and potential advantages for the emperor's rule. Marriage alliances with powerful families could secure military support, economic resources, and political stability, while neglecting important families could lead to rebellion and civil war. The emperor's romantic choices were therefore matters of state policy, not personal preference. The sheer scale of imperial harems was staggering by any historical standard. During the Tang dynasty, emperors might maintain several thousand women in various capacities, from high-ranking consorts to serving girls who might catch the imperial eye. The Ming and Qing dynasties were somewhat more restrained, but even they maintained harems of several hundred women, creating miniature cities within the palace walls. The hierarchy within the harem was as complex as the imperial bureaucracy itself. At the top were the empress and various levels of consorts, each with specific titles, allowances, and privileges. Below them were countless gradations of concubines, palace ladies, and servants, each hoping to advance their position through imperial favor. The competition for the emperor's attention was intense, involving not just physical beauty, but also intelligence, cultural accomplishments, and political cunning. Daily life in the imperial harem was a carefully choreographed dance of ritual, competition, and survival. Women spent their days in elaborate beauty routines, cultural pursuits, and subtle maneuvering for position. They studied poetry and painting, practiced music and dance, and cultivated the refined accomplishments that might distinguish them from hundreds of other beautiful women. The pressure to maintain perfect appearance and behavior was constant, as a single moment of imperial attention could transform a woman's life, while imperial displeasure could lead to exile or death. The selection process for harem women was itself a complex political and social mechanism. Families from across the empire would present their most beautiful and accomplished daughters for imperial consideration, often beginning the grooming process years in advance. Regional officials were tasked with identifying suitable candidates, while court eunuchs and established harem members wielded significant influence over who would be selected and how they would be positioned within the hierarchy. The emperor's intimate relationships within this system were shaped by factors far beyond personal attraction or romantic feeling. The timing of imperial visits to different consorts was carefully managed to balance political considerations, family pressures, and the need to produce heirs. Court astrologers might advise on auspicious dates for conception, while palace physicians monitored the health and fertility of the women most likely to bear future emperors. The production of male heirs was the ultimate goal of the harem system, but this created its own complex dynamics. Women who successfully bore sons gained tremendous status and security, while those who remained childless or produced only daughters faced uncertain futures. The competition to become pregnant with the emperor's child was fierce, leading to various forms of sabotage, alliance building, and political maneuvering among harem members. Succession politics within the harem could determine the fate of the empire. When an emperor died, the mothers of potential heirs would engage in complex struggles for power, often involving different factions of court officials, military leaders, and regional governors. These struggles could lead to civil wars, palace coups, and dramatic shifts in imperial policy that affected millions of people. The role of eunuchs in managing harem politics was crucial and often decisive. These castrated men, who posed no sexual threat to imperial women, served as intermediaries, advisors, and power brokers within the complex world of palace romance and reproduction. The most successful eunuchs understood how to navigate the competing interests of different harem factions while maintaining the emperor's trust and favor. Some imperial women achieved remarkable power and influence despite the constraints of the harem system. Empress Wu Zetian famously became the only woman to rule China in her own right, using her position as imperial concubine and then empress to build a power base that eventually allowed her to depose the legitimate dynasty and establish her own rule. Other imperial women wielded power behind the scenes, influencing policy through their relationships with emperors and their control over succession politics. The cultural impact of the imperial harem extended far beyond the palace walls. Stories of beautiful concubines, tragic love affairs, and palace intrigue became staples of Chinese literature and popular culture. These narratives shaped how ordinary people understood romance, sexuality, and the relationship between love and power. The idealization of imperial concubines in art and literature created models of feminine beauty and behavior that influenced fashion, social customs, and romantic ideals throughout Chinese society. The economic aspects of maintaining imperial harems were staggering. The cost of housing, feeding, clothing, and entertaining thousands of women, along with the eunuchs and servants who managed them, represented a significant portion of imperial budgets. Silk merchants, jewelers, cosmetics makers, and countless other industries depended on harem consumption for their prosperity. The luxury and extravagance of harem life both demonstrated imperial power and contributed to the economic problems that eventually weakened dynasties. The psychological toll of harem life was severe for many women who found themselves trapped in a system that offered the possibility of great power and luxury, but often delivered loneliness, frustration, and disappointment. Most harem women never achieved significant status or bore imperial children, spending their lives in a luxurious prison where their primary function was to be available for an emperor's occasional attention. Religious and philosophical influences shaped harem culture in complex ways. Confucian ideals about feminine virtue and family hierarchy provided the theoretical framework for harem organization, while Taoist and Buddhist influences contributed ideas about spiritual cultivation and the proper management of desire. Some harem women became serious practitioners of religious disciplines, using spiritual practice to find meaning and purpose within the constraints of palace life. The decline of imperial harems paralleled the decline of imperial power itself. As China encountered Western influences and modernizing pressures in the 19th and 20th centuries, the harem system came to be seen as a symbol of feudal backwardness rather than imperial magnificence. The last Chinese emperor, Puyi, maintained a much reduced harem that was more symbolic than functional, and the system finally ended with the establishment of the Republic of China in 19. The legacy of imperial harems continues to influence contemporary Chinese culture through literature, film, and popular entertainment that draws on the dramatic stories and complex relationships that characterized palace life. These cultural productions often romanticize harem life, while also acknowledging its darker aspects, creating complex narratives about power, sexuality, and women's agency that resonate with contemporary audiences. Modern feminist scholarship has re-examined the harem system to understand both its oppressive aspects and the ways in which some women manage to exercise agency and achieve power within its constraints. This scholarship reveals that while the system was fundamentally patriarchal and limiting, it also provided some women with opportunities for education, cultural achievement, and political influence that might not have been available through other means. The imperial harem system represents perhaps the most extreme example of how sexuality, politics, and power intersected in traditional Chinese society. It demonstrates both the sophisticated organizational capabilities of Chinese civilization and the human costs of systems that treated women primarily as political and reproductive resources, rather than as individuals with their own desires and aspirations. As we reach the end of our journey through the intimate landscapes of ancient China, it's worth reflecting on how these ancient approaches to sexuality, romance, and relationships continue to influence modern understanding and practice. The sophisticated philosophical frameworks, medical knowledge, and cultural practices developed over thousands of years of Chinese civilization created legacies that persist in various forms today. The integration of sexuality with health and spirituality that characterize Chinese approaches offers valuable perspectives for modern discussions about sexual wellness. The understanding that intimate relationships affect not just individual pleasure, but overall health, emotional balance, and spiritual development provides a holistic framework that many contemporary practitioners find relevant and useful. The Chinese emphasis on balance, moderation, and harmony in sexual relationships offers alternatives to both repressive and purely hedonistic approaches to sexuality. The idea that sexual activity should be conscious, purposeful, and attuned to natural rhythms provides guidance that transcends specific cultural contexts and remains applicable to modern relationships. The sophisticated understanding of female sexuality, found in ancient Chinese texts, was remarkably advanced for its time and in some ways surpassed Western understanding until very recently. The recognition that female pleasure was important for health, successful conception, and relationship harmony demonstrates a level of sexual sophistication that modern couples and therapists are still working to achieve. The literary and artistic traditions that celebrated romantic love and sexual passion while maintaining cultural respectability created models for expressing intimate feelings that influenced generations of lovers. These cultural achievements demonstrate that sexuality can be integrated with the highest forms of artistic and intellectual expression, rather than being relegated to purely physical or shameful categories. The medical and philosophical understanding of sexual energy as a fundamental force in human life that could be cultivated for health and spiritual development offers perspectives that are being rediscovered by contemporary practitioners of various wellness traditions. The techniques for managing sexual energy, timing intimate activities, and integrating sexuality with spiritual practice continue to influence modern approaches to sexual health and relationship counseling. However, it's important to acknowledge that ancient Chinese approaches to sexuality also reflected and reinforced significant inequalities and restrictions, particularly for women. While some aspects of Chinese sexual culture were remarkably progressive, others reflected patriarchal values that limited women's autonomy and reduced their sexuality to reproductive and male pleasure functions. The institution of concubinage, while providing some women with opportunities for advancement, was fundamentally based on inequality and male privilege. The double standards regarding male and female sexual behavior reflected deeper social inequalities that caused genuine suffering for many individuals who couldn't conform to restrictive social expectations. The emphasis on family obligation and social harmony sometimes came at the expense of individual desire and autonomy. The pressure to marry, produce heirs, and maintain family honor could force people into relationships and sexual situations that didn't serve their personal happiness or fulfillment. Modern applications of ancient Chinese sexual wisdom must therefore be selective, adapting useful insights while rejecting aspects that conflict with contemporary values about equality, consent, and individual autonomy. The goal should be to learn from the sophistication and depth of ancient Chinese approaches, while building more inclusive and egalitarian frameworks for understanding sexuality and relationships. The enduring influence of Chinese sexual culture can be seen in various contemporary practices and movements. Traditional Chinese medicine continues to offer treatments for sexual dysfunction and fertility issues that integrate physical, emotional, and energetic approaches. Martial arts and qigong practices that originated in ancient China include exercises specifically designed to enhance sexual vitality and intimate connection. Modern relationship counseling and sex therapy have incorporated insights from Chinese traditions about the importance of emotional harmony, communication, and mutual satisfaction in intimate relationships. The understanding that sexual problems often reflect broader relationship dynamics and health issues has become central to contemporary therapeutic approaches. The Chinese literary tradition's sophisticated treatment of romantic and sexual themes continues to influence contemporary writers and artists who seek to explore intimate relationships with depth and cultural sensitivity. The techniques for expressing sexual and romantic feelings through symbolism, metaphor, and allusion provide alternatives to more explicit, but perhaps less emotionally resonant approaches. Contemporary discussions about sexual mindfulness, conscious sexuality, and the integration of spiritual practice with intimate relationships often draw on insights that were first developed in ancient Chinese contexts. The idea that sexual activity can be a form of meditation, healing, and spiritual development has found new audiences among people seeking more meaningful approaches to sexuality. The Chinese understanding of seasonal and cyclical influences on sexuality has influenced modern approaches to fertility awareness, natural family planning, and the timing of intimate activities for optimal health and satisfaction. While some specific beliefs about lunar influences may not have scientific support, the general principle of paying attention to natural rhythms and bodily cycles has proven valuable. As we conclude our exploration of sexuality in ancient China, we're reminded that human beings have always sought to understand and enhance their intimate relationships. The sophisticated philosophies, medical knowledge, and cultural practices developed in ancient Chinese civilization represent thousands of years of accumulated wisdom about one of the most fundamental aspects of human experience. While we can't and shouldn't simply adopt ancient practices without consideration of modern values and knowledge, we can learn from the depth, sophistication, and holistic thinking that characterized Chinese approaches to sexuality. The integration of physical pleasure with emotional satisfaction, spiritual development, and social harmony offers a model for thinking about intimate relationships that remains relevant today. The recognition that sexuality is too important and complex to be left to chance or instinct, but requires cultivation, understanding, and conscious attention, is perhaps the most valuable legacy of ancient Chinese sexual wisdom. In our contemporary world, where discussions of sexuality often oscillate between puritanical repression and shallow hedonism, the Chinese model of conscious, balanced, and spiritually informed sexuality offers a middle path worth considering. Perhaps most importantly, the Chinese tradition reminds us that sexuality is fundamentally about relationship between partners, between individuals and their communities, between human beings and the natural world, and between people and the cosmic forces that govern existence. This relational understanding of sexuality, rather than viewing it as purely individual pleasure or biological function, provides a framework for thinking about intimate relationships that honors both personal fulfillment and social responsibility. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps you can reflect on how the ancient wisdom we've explored might inform your own understanding of love, intimacy, and human connection. The gentle Chinese emphasis on harmony, balance, and conscious attention to the subtle energies that flow between people offers a peaceful way to think about one of life's most powerful and mysterious forces. In the end, the story of sexuality in ancient China reminds us that human beings have always sought to make sense of desire, love, and intimate connection within the broader context of living meaningful, healthy, and harmonious lives. The specific forms that this search took in ancient Chinese civilization may be distant from our own experience, but the underlying human needs and aspirations remain remarkably constant across time and culture. And so we conclude our nocturnal journey through the intimate world of ancient China, where philosophy met passion, where medicine met desire, and where human beings worked for thousands of years to understand one of the most fundamental aspects of what it means to be alive. Sweet dreams, and may your own relationships be blessed with the harmony, consciousness, and deep satisfaction that the ancient Chinese sages sought in their pursuit of the perfect balance between earthly pleasure and cosmic harmony.